This past week, Netflix surprised all of us by dropping Godzilla Minus 1, and fans of the film can finally rewatch the black and white version of the film by renting or purchasing it digitally. And I assume physical media releases won't be far behind, hopefully. I saw the color version of Minus 1 in theaters, but didn't get the chance to see Minus Color in the same way. So last night I had a chance to sit down and watch it and test whether all my favorite YouTube movie critics were right about this specific version of the film. That being that the black and white version is superior in many ways, making Godzilla feel more frightening and making the effects feel more real, with comparisons to it being like an updated version of the original 1954 film Gojira. Now, I've always felt that horror films are sometimes better in black and white. Not always, but I definitely see an argument that some films would be better if they were shot that way from the start, that it adds to the horror and atmosphere. And largely, I'd say that's true. I immensely enjoy Minus 1, and I think the black and white version adds an eerie weight to everything, especially the scenes taking place at night. Seriously, if you haven't seen Minus 1, you need to. It's a great movie, and I'd say I even liked it more on this second viewing. But this is not a review. Minus 1 is great, and you should watch it. It has compelling characters and brings Godzilla back to being a monster, an allegory for nuclear testing and how Japan treated its citizens and soldiers like they were disposable. No, I really want to talk about visual effects for a bit, because something kept bothering me during my viewing of the black and white version of the film. I know that Godzilla was brought to life with mostly CGI in this one. The same is true of Shin Godzilla, the last Japanese Godzilla film, which is also totally worth your time. Both films used CGI to bring Godzilla to life, but the difference is Shin Godzilla went out of its way to mimic the way a human actor would move in a suit, and the result was something that, outside of a few dodgy effects where Godzilla moves a little too fast, I can't tell whether it was practical or CGI or a mix of the two. And the effects in Minus 1, regardless of version, always feel like CGI. They stand out. I also prefer Shin Godzilla's design. I think he looks way creepier, but that's a personal opinion. If you're not going to do practical effects work, then trying to make it look as real as possible is the way to go, in my opinion. But as far as cost goes, and I know that is a growing concern in filmmaking in general, not just Hollywood, why not just use an actor in a fucking suit and then touch it up with CGI Jurassic Park style? It seems like a no-brainer, but practical effects will always fool the eye better than CGI, and I don't understand why we're leaning more and more into the realm of replacing it entirely when it's clearly not as cost-effective and has the tendency to burn out effects studios, sometimes to the point of bankrupting those studios in the process in the US. Looking at you, Marvel. Think about this for a second. Remember Alien? I was recently having a chat with Fact Fiend's Carl Smallwood on the subject of Alien 3. And we went on a tangent lamenting the fact that the original actor, Balaji Badejo, who portrayed the xenomorph in the costume in Alien, was never brought back in Aliens. And that is a bizarre, mind-blowing thing, too, because the guy's performance is legendary. But Carl sells it way better than I ever could, so I'll go ahead and let the fact goblin himself tell it.
So, Carl, yesterday we were talking about suit actors and stuff like that, and very briefly when we were discussing Alien 3. And we went on this tangent about Balaji Badejo. Could you elaborate for my audience to sort of break down what the difference between his performance and sort of, I guess, the tragedy that he wasn't able to reprise that role in the future?
Do you mean like tragedy in the sense that he died? Because that is unfortunate. Like, Alien
he
is
did.
His singular acting role.
Yeah, it's sad, and I do mention that in the script too. I think it sucks that he got screwed out of doing more, because he was a very talented physical performer.
He was indeed, yes, and a lot of his physical performance was entirely informed by just his build, because presumably you've told the story of the reason he got cast is because just a casting director saw him in a pub having a pint and just saw this impossibly tall Nigerian student grabbing a pint and was like, hey, do you want to be an alien? And prior to casting Badejo, they'd contacted all manner of very tall people, including one Peter Mayhew, most notably famous for performing Chewbacca physically, and just none of them really worked. And if memory serves, Badejo stood just over 6'10" tall, and H.R. Giger didn't meet Badejo for quite a while and was only sent plaster casts of what he looked like while he was working on the alien sculpt for the costume. And he wasn't initially that impressed because he was told, we found the guy, we found the alien, and the sculpts apparently that he got sent were done wrong. So he assumed that Badejo was fatter than he was in real life, and it wasn't until the two men met physically that Giger was just stunned and supposedly stood there in stunned silence for several seconds, just looking over Badejo's physique, and said something along the lines of, "You are the alien. I will create something for you." And he, just started all over again because he wanted to create something based entirely around Badejo's very unique frame.
That's awesome. How was Badejo and Giger himself cut out of that process?
Well, it's not so much that they were cut out, it's just that it was next to impossible to find someone who matched the physical proportions of Badejo. Like in the notes that Giger got sent when they said, "Hey, we found this Nigerian student, we think they could be the alien," it literally said they have knock knees and, I quote, "an impossible build." That's why Giger was so keen to meet them, because who is this person who has a impossibly inhuman proportions? I need to meet them. And Badejo and Giger worked very closely together. In fact, they were the only two people allowed to look at dailies of the alien, because Ridley Scott wanted to keep what the alien looked like, especially the alien in motion, as secret as possible. So Badejo and Giger were the only two people allowed to sitting on that process. And Badejo would turn up every morning to get into costume, and there's really great behind-the-scenes footage out there, if you can find it, of Badejo not in costume, but just wearing the alien head. And just wearing the alien head, creeping through the sets, is fucking terrifying.
I've seen that. It's great.
It is amazing, and there's also just some extra details about the alien costume, because the first alien costume there's a lot of details on it that aren't present in later versions, because they simplified it because it was too costly to reproduce what Giger did. And Badejo wasn't a formally trained actor or stunt actor by any stretch of the imagination, so he had to undergo a lot of rather unusual training, and that kind of lent to his performance, because he didn't know what to do. That kind of made what he did do very unique. For example, he went to Tai Chi classes to learn how to control his breathing, and gave the alien, it's weird, I believe he referred to it as mantis-like movements, which is why you see the hands are always out as he moves around. Because something Giger was very insistent upon when designing the initial alien is that, there's a bunch of details about the alien costume that you might not notice on an initial watch and are not present on later alien costumes. They include a skull beneath the carapace of the alien, which is translucent, but you can't really see it in the film because it's dark. There's a human skull under there with its empty eye sockets. To create it and to just hammer home the sexual imagery that is present across a lot of Giger's work. The weird jaw hinges, they were created using condoms and KY jelly. Yeah, so I have some quotes here. So for anyone curious, there's some quotes from Giger about when he met Badejo here. Simply stating, "I will make a new cast from the chest down upon physically meeting Badejo, writing in a diary, I think he's our man." And as you mentioned, Badejo unfortunately passed away quite young, but he did give a few interviews before he did, in one of which he stated, and I quote, "The creature was supposed to be graceful as well as vicious, requiring slow, deliberate movements, but there was some action I had to do pretty quickly. I remember having to keep Yaphet Kotto, throw him against the wall and rush up to him. Veronica Cartwright was really terrified. After I fling Yaphet Kotto back with my tail, I turned to go after her. There's blood in my mouth and she was incredible. She wasn't acting, she was really scared." As you might imagine, when a 6'10" man in an alien costume is bearing down upon you.
Yeah.
And then that's followed up by a quote by Cartwright herself from 2013. "When he comes after me in that scene, I didn't have to do anything. I just looked at him, and the thing was, once he uncoiled and he stood there, and I just had to look at him, and you go, oh shit." And instinctively what he did was just amazing. He had this incredible presence. And people say, "How did you make yourself scared?" I didn't do anything. I just had to look at him. And I think that's right there speaks to the benefit of just having a physical thing on set to react to, because it's one thing to you can create all manner of amazing things using CGI, but there's something to be said about just slapping a near 7-foot tall man inside of an alien costume and having him chase your actors around the set. You can't get that kind of performance with a tennis ball on a stick.
Human actors can always find inventive ways to move in costumes, or just by doing acrobat shit. Like this scene in Resident Alien where Harry Vanderspiegel walks upside down like a fucking human spider. God, I love this show, and you should watch it. We need season 4. And what's really interesting is that sometimes the practical suits people wear in these projects end up adding and influencing that performance in ways that motion capture would never be able to do. Although, as I say that, I got flashbacks to production footage of the 2014 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, and now I want to go wash my eyes out with acid. But those were bad because of terrible scripting and a director that was basically just Michael Bay light, and the idea to use weighted suits was actually a really good one. And speaking of TMNT, remember the original 1990 movie? Yeah, who fucking doesn't? It's one of the greatest independent films ever made, and still the fucking GOAT for TMNT films. No live-action Turtles project has worked quite as well as that first film, though the second film still looks really good, due in no small part to the incredible work by Jim Henson's Creature Shop. And the reason for that is that there is something tangible on screen. I don't think CGI humanoid turtles will ever be able to connect as well with the audience without having something physical on screen for people to relate to, whether it's a performance, a puppet, or otherwise in a live-action project. The same, I think, is true of Godzilla in -1, as even in the black and white version, I kept analyzing the effects. It wasn't something that totally took me out of the experience, but largely Godzilla seemed to look the most real when he was half submerged in water and swimming. Side note, that scene with the boat and the mines was super fucking tense. Huge props to the actors and filmmakers on that one. I think most of the scenes dealing with Godzilla in the film would have been that much more believable had they chosen to use an actor in a suit and then later enhance with CGI. CGI is often best when it's not noticeable. Just ask Christopher Nolan. For all my gripes with the guy's recent slate of movies, he's really good at masking CGI in his films to the point where you mostly can't tell. It's why the original 1954 Gojira film still sticks so vividly in my mind. A lot of those effects, while limited and obviously flawed based on what we can do now, still look far more nightmarish and frightening to me than anything produced in the modern era. I think the only thing that comes close is Shin Godzilla. Seriously, if you're a fan of Godzilla -1 or just a fan of cinema in general, you owe it to yourself to watch the original 1954 film. To cap this all off, recently I took a class on how to make monster and tentacle effects from essentially plastic bags. The instructor was the legendary Billy Bryan, the guy behind the effects of Species, Jurassic Park 3, and Ghostbusters, with Steve Johnson, known as the mad scientist of monster making, helping out with the explanations. It was kind of wild learning that many of the effects we find memorable in 80s and 90s science fiction films were done with essentially plastic bags. It might sound funny, but a lot of intense, groundbreaking special effects were done this way. Things like the birthing scene in Species, which I won't show, a large number of background aliens in Men in Black, and a lot of what was done in classic horror flicks from that era. But one thing I figured I'd highlight is when Billy Bryan talks about doing the effect shots this way for Phantoms. Now, I will preface this by the fact that I've never seen Phantoms. I know that Affleck was the bomb in Phantoms, but I've never seen it, never got around to it. But I have seen the final effect shot for the Lovecraftian monster reveal, and I've seen the effect shots for what Billy Bryan and his crew came up with. And I can totally see a world where the film's monster reveal would have looked a lot better with Billy's effects. Maybe with a mix of CGI to touch things up. Billy's work is haunting and beautiful, similar in the way that the sculpt for the space jockey gives you this eerie feeling in Alien. But the studio decided to go with CGI effects instead. For reasons that I imagine boil down to, the industry is changing and this is the future, so we better hop on this bandwagon even though the technology is just not there yet. A similar story surrounds the 2011 Thing prequel, which was originally meant to use practical effects instead of the CGI mess that we ended up getting. Now, this is not a fault of the filmmakers. Rumor has it that the studio decided to go with CGI instead of those practical effects because they thought the practical shots looked like an 80s movie. And this was apparently bad for a prequel to an 80s movie. Yeah, wrap your head around that.
The story goes that, or at least the story as far as I'm aware, is that a Hollywood producer working on the movie saw an early test cut of the effects without all, like, just as they were setting them up, and thought that's what the movie would look like. and they couldn't be convinced that, no, okay, it looks bad from that angle, but the camera's not looking at it from that angle. The camera's looking at it from this angle. It only needs to look good from the angle the camera's looking at it. And they just could not be convinced that the practical effects would look good.
It's just fucking mind-blowing.
So they decided to replace everything with CGI and completely cut out Amalgamated Dynamics' work from the film. This was the company that worked on the practical effects, by the way. Now, this basically ruins the film, making it completely inferior to John Carpenter's The Thing, which still has some of the greatest effect shots in any science fiction film. Which is a shame, because some of the practical effects shots as shared by Amalgamated Dynamics are really compelling. Imagine a world where the 2011 Thing prequel wasn't a dumpster fire with fans, where it lives up to the original, giving context to the original's opening sequence. I think fans would love a recut of the film that strips it of the CGI and adds the practical effects back, but that's unlikely to ever happen. But now, Hollywood is facing a serious problem. Big budget superhero and special effects heavy, read CGI, blockbusters are tanking at the box office. And I think studios are seriously going to think twice about greenlighting anything with inflated budgets in the $200 to $300 million range going forward because of this. My hope, my silver lining, if you will, is that this will force studios to return to practical effects, seeing as how practical effects are still more cost-effective in the long run. If independent studios like A24 can release low-budget horror flicks and make their money back, and then some at the box office, I see no reason why the industry as a whole can't learn from that example and cut some costs. And while Godzilla Minus 1 is a great film, I think it would be that much more likely to stand the test of time if it had been shot with a mixture of CGI and practical effects. But hey, that's just my opinion. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments. As always, if you dug what I had to say in this video, be sure to do all that algorithmic jazz and tell the YouTube algorithm that Storyrant does not in fact suck. Check those links in the description. There's a free sci-fi horror ebook in there for you if you're interested, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.